Joining us now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get into why this is such a big deal. There are Americans who might not have ever heard of the Hatch Act, don't know what it says. Can you explain why it is such an abuse of power for the president to stand in front of the White House and accept the nomination by his party for president again?
Certainly. Thank you, Katie. And what we saw in that clip is just an obscenity. I think Walter Shaw is exactly right. He described it as a civic sin and maybe a religious sin as well. But the whole point of the Hatch Act, the whole point of the law that prohibits you from using federal resources in your campaign, which goes back to the Roosevelt era, is that you shouldn't be able to perpetuate yourself in office by misusing federal employees, federal money, federal buildings, federal properties to help your campaign. You shouldn't be able to coerce employees in particular by threatening if they help your campaign, you'll reward them. If they don't, they'll lose their jobs. You shouldn't have that leverage over people in the federal government. So what Donald Trump is doing here, and I think this is really key to understanding such a flagrant abuse of the Hatch Act, the lawlessness is the point. It's not a side effect of him merely wanting this backdrop and the ego gratification. The breaking of the law is Trump's point. Like so many other autocrats and aspiring autocrats, he is proud of his lawlessness. And we see it time and time again, in other areas of the government as well. The immigration policy, for example, people point out, putting children in cages is cruel, as if it were a side effect, an unintended consequence, when the cruelty is the point. And here the lawlessness is the point, which, you might say is ironic for someone running on a law and order platform, but it's the playbook of all autocrats. I must violate the law. I'm above the law under Article 2. This president would say he can do whatever he wants in order to protect law and order. And it's dangerous.
He's made it clear he thinks he can do whatever he wants. He's going to keep on doing it. He's acting with a certain sense of impunity. Do we need stricter laws with tougher consequences for this sort of behavior in the future?
I think we do. And, if you look at the federal workforce, those that have been brought up on charges, civil charges by the special counsel's office, I'm sure they feel like the penalties are pretty severe that they have faced. Some have lost their jobs. Some have had to work without pay. What they're seeing, though, is that for the president or Kellyanne Conway, who said basically when it was pointed out her dozens of violations of the law, blah, 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 tell me about it when you take me to jail, or Mark Meadows saying nobody cares about that outside the Beltway. What most federal employees are seeing is a complete double standard. For them, it does have serious consequences. It affects their livelihood. For the president and his criminal cronies, there is no consequence. And for this and so many other things, we really need a package of our own post-Watergate reforms, for lack of a better description, to curb these kind of violations of law and norm of office.
Mr. Chairman, can we pivot for a second and go to the Ukraine scheme, which ultimately got Donald Trump impeached? Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, who served on Donald Trump's defense team in his impeachment trial, tried to run with the debunked conspiracy about Joe Biden and Ukraine on Wednesday. Let's listen to her for a moment.
That very same company was being investigated by a Ukrainian prosecutor. Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States, threatened to withhold aid to Ukraine unless that same prosecutor was fired. And then he was fired.
Other than Pam Bondi, though, there wasn't a word about it. Even Rudy Giuliani, who was at the center of the scheme, did not say a word about Ukraine. What do you make of that?
Well, they obviously don't think, at least in terms of convention, that it's a very winning argument to make. Nonetheless, they did trot out this one speaker who has quite a rather blemished record of her own, accepting $25,000 in a campaign contribution from the Trump Foundation, a charitable organization that's not supposed to make campaign contributions. And then a short time later, she decides not to join the lawsuit against Trump University. So I guess you got to go to someone like that to make this kind of dishonest argument. But I think that the bigger reason why you didn't see them talk much about this is they didn't want to remind people that the president of the United States was impeached, one of just three in history to go to trial in the Senate for abusing his power. It was, as the president, I think, acknowledged, one of the worst days of his presidency, and rightly so. But I also think that in terms of the Democratic Party, our view is as serious as that Ukraine misconduct of the president's is and was. 180,000 Americans are now dead. That is really the issue, the incompetence, the malignant narcissism of the presidents that resulted in those deaths. The lack of character and decency that we proved during the trial, I think, left a lasting impression on the American people. But the pressing need to address the pandemic and the economic crisis that it has brought about for Democrats is what we really need to be talking about. And for the Republicans, what they don't want to talk about, but they also realize in terms of the president's impeachable conduct, that's not much of a winner for them either.
So even though he wasn't removed from office, the Senate acquitted him. Is the dividend here that we aren't hearing about Joe Biden and Ukraine day in and day out? We're not hearing at least that piece of disinformation from this campaign.
Well, they may feel, look, they've got Republican senators who are willing to push that disinformation, that bit of Russian propaganda, so they don't need to do it during the convention when they have the president's enablers doing it for them on a weekly basis in Congress. But I really think that probably, I don't know that I would describe it as a dividend, but the lasting impact of the impeachment was to really cement an impression and understanding with the American people that this president doesn't know right from wrong, is fundamentally indecent, cannot tell the truth, and for that reason is a danger to the country because he's not motivated by what's best for the country, only what's best for him. And sadly, we got to see that played out with this pandemic, where the decisions on testing, on tracing, that display of non-mask wearing at the convention itself are just a ultimate tragic proof of what we showed during the trial, his fundamental unfitness for office.
Also, his decisions to hold the convention on the White House lawn, to accept the renomination on the White House lawn in front of the People's House, not Donald Trump's house. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for joining us tonight.